I just bought a share of Slack, and I'm
Oh
making
yeah, now
money.
you're trying to have a
Okay, now I have to
conflict of
inform you
interest.
that this call may be recorded for quality and training purposes.
Yeah.
No, not for quality and training purposes. Yeah, for maybe other
We
reasons.
won't, but I don't know where the file is, so I don't know how much training. It was.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Honestly,
So
it's
what's
important to
first
call.
on the agenda? Bernard Sanders? What are we?
No, no,
Let's
no,
start
no.
with
The
something
agenda
that
is
nobody's
finding
going to argue about, right?
No, the first on the agenda is talking about the quality of our connection. And
Yeah, right. Of course. Yeah,
for about a half hour. So.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. We can go two ways because we're talking about the minimum wage thing, but there's
Yeah,
also
sure.
the
If you want to talk about that,
coronavirus. So I don't know.
coronavirus. Yeah,
Well, it's all the time. I mean, nobody else is thinking about anything else. That's the problem. So we should probably just try and be upstarts and just ignore the topic, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what is there to talk about? I mean, all the schools are closing, and we could talk about, how, okay, they're closed for 2 weeks here in Quebec. I mean, a month in California. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is there anything really interesting there? I mean,
The most interesting thing to me is how bad most people are at interpreting data and math and understanding,
Yeah. The percentage's chance of dying, things like that.
or just understanding the way that these, like there's a lot of estimates about infection that don't take into account any sort of mitigation, and those coupled with highly pessimistic death rates are being extrapolated into things that are probably way off base.
What you mean, like when people start using the Purell and washing their hands all the time, that's actually going to slow it down? And,
well, they keep saying that, like, social distancing. It's like we're already doing it. Everyone's already like on lockdown. It's not going to be half the population. So
yeah, I mean, people aren't flying, and people are. I mean, now there's all sorts of, like, I mean, here there's all kinds of ordered social distancing. They're closing. The government's ordered like spas to close and things. I just sent you that link, CJ. It's really extensive. Restaurants can only serve half the capacity and stuff.
They just closed all the bars in California a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, we're on the fence now. We have a trip to Hawaii in 2 weeks, and
oh, you're not doing that. That's not happening.
I don't know. We'll see.
Domestic flights are still running, apparently.
Yeah. Hawaii's safer than here.
My cousin's a pilot. He said that one of the ways people might start avoiding the European travel ban to the United States is to come through Canada, which is interesting because they, the flight, our borders are still open, which is surprising, because we're supposed to have this wonderful, beautiful prime minister who saves everybody, and so, I don't know if that's going to happen. Business people will do that to get into the United States. I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
good.
If they keep things locked down just for like literally 2 more weeks, the kids are getting a lot better.
That's the other thing is, like, my wife keeps saying, "Oh, Jesus, we're not going to be able to travel anywhere this summer." Like, I think some people think it's going to go on for months and months. It seems to be the sense, like. Right? And how long can it last? How long can the lockdown go on for, right?
I don't know. I know Dr. Drew was saying it's another like couple weeks to a month, probably. He has a much more optimistic view of this than some people.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you listen to the second Sam Harris podcast about it, is a lot more optimistic as well.
Really?
And I think that's because that guy's actually studies diseases.
Yeah,
understands the life cycle.
Just a doctor. Yeah,
there guy's a doctor that specializes in like networks and stuff, but this guy's actually like studies viral infections and outbreaks, and
right.
He's saying,
oh yeah, it was way better than the first one. The first one was actually good, but I thought the second one was way better. Not just because it was optimistic. I mean, that was part of why I liked it.
No, it's just a domain expert instead of just just because someone has MD.
Someone who understands outbreaks and viral infections.
He studies all the time. Like the end was very interesting. He's like, this is all very, whatever it is. But he actually flipped and he turned upside down and he went, we're not nearly doing enough for when an actual outbreak, like if something actually serious were to happen.
Yeah.
It's so bad.
Well, what if this isn't serious? What is?
Well, the same virus that kills 60% of people, not 0.3%.
Or
has there ever been such a virus? The plague, maybe?
Well, usually
Uh,
there's things with high death rates like that have low transmission.
right,
Um,
right.
But
Yeah.
that's
We
just
can't count on that,
but the
right?
important thing is usually, right? I mean, that's the
Right,
important.
right.
oh, I heard someone on Rogan was talking about how as the ice melts, there's going to be actually they found viruses come out of the ice and still be alive from like 1,000 years ago.
So maybe what was that around 1,000 years ago? What
And I
are
Yeah,
bet
the,
Rogan was like, "Ooh, gross, man!
yeah, yeah. He
Ooh,
freaked out
whoa,
about
oh
it for sure.
god.
whoa,
Yeah,
1,000-year-old virus! Wow, Jamie, you looked that one up."
yeah. Well, no, one thing that came
Yeah.
out of the ice was anthrax, which is kind
Anthrax.
of scary.
That's a
Yeah.
bacteria. Generally, bacteria can survive in ice. I don't know that a lot of viruses can.
Yeah,
Yeah, it makes more sense a bacteria could be frozen than
They live in
than a
spore
virus.
form. There's spore
Right.
forms of bacteria,
Yeah.
I think, that are very hardy.
yeah.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
viruses don't have any spore form. They don't procreate in the same way. They're not self-sustaining. They're not even cells.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
anyway, if you look at the site that everyone's looking at for the infection rates, the curve is almost following exactly the shape it did in China. And if that's true, it's right about to start leveling out.
Yeah.
But
Well, it has leveled out.
What? Wait.
In
Where are
China,
you
right?
talking about?
yeah, John Hopkins site that everyone uses,
No, no, no. Where is it leveling? What
Oh,
area?
worldwide.
China.
No,
World,
just
China.
average worldwide is leveling out in the same kind of shape as China was.
but it's not leveling even in Italy, which I just looked at it today. I thought Italy would be leveling with deaths, especially because yesterday they fell from 250 to 175, but today they were up to 368. So
Yeah.
it's not leveling.
Remember
Well,
about
it's also
Italy,
testing,
CJ.
though.
No, no,
Think
no.
about
This is
Italy.
deaths. Deaths. This is people like
Deaths.
stop
No, but
heart stop.
CJ, one possible reason why it's worse in Italy. This is pure speculation. Maybe it's wrong, but it's an older age demographic in Italy,
Yeah.
right? It's an older population, right?
Yeah, it's
So
100%
wouldn't it be
true.
more likely that the death rate would be higher there than in, say, I don't know, Mexico or something with a younger
Well, Korea
population,
definitely
right?
leveled out. Did they do the lockdown thing in Korea? That I didn't even notice if they
No,
did.
no, they didn't need to do it. What they did is they tested everybody, and
Yeah.
they're able
Yeah,
to track
right,
it.
right.
And that's what we should be doing.
Mm.
That's also they have a much higher denominator in terms of
No, I know they do, but
detecting it, which is why their death rate's so low. It's because they actually know what it is.
yeah, but that doesn't change the fact that it's deadly and transmissible. Why would
Yeah.
testing help other than just information?
No,
Well,
no,
you find out
testing.
who's infected
Yeah,
and
and
who's
you
not
stop it from
infected.
Oh,
spreading.
but how do you stop the deaths? Why were there so few deaths without a lockdown?
Well, this deaths is just you're talking about a percentage or a total number because the
No.
percentage is lower because they actually know what the total infections are.
Yeah.
In Italy, they might not have nearly as good testing as they did in South Korea, so
Of
the
course, they don't,
proportion
but it
is going
doesn't
to.
change the number of people that get it and die. None of
Yeah,
that.
but if there's 1,000 cases that are mild that you don't know about, you're gonna have a fucked up percentage of death if you don't know about that.
Just thinking about the numbers of dead. Why were the numbers of dead low in South Korea?
The overall numbers were lower
Yeah.
in South
It's
Korea.
completely arbitrary. It has to do with the population and the density and all these other things. It doesn't.
Mm.
It's you got to look at the percentages being meaningful.
No,
number.
well, one reason
Total raw
CJ
numbers
might
mean
be
nothing.
the age demographic thing again. Korea's a younger population than Italy, right?
We got 75 dead in South Korea, which is like
Yeah.
crazy low. Crazy low. They had a
I
big
mean,
out.
remember what's the average age in Italy? Like 50, right?
Well,
Something
Korea
like
also
that.
has 8,000 cases, and
Yeah.
there's
And how
21,000 cases in Italy,
right?
and they have
And
a
it's an
higher
older
death percentage.
population on top of
And
the. Yeah.
so
Right.
why did it level out and fall?
Because in South Korea, because they're testing people and they're stopping people who have it, they're telling them to self quarantine.
Okay. So you're saying that because when they effectively quarantine people, individuals, they stopped its transmission.
Yeah,
Okay.
when they track the spread, they have way better results
Okay.
than when they
All
don't.
right, I'll roll with that. That makes a lot of sense, and we're just behind the curve, so we have to take this more.
Well,
drastic.
also we have a little bit of an advantage that to make up for our slow response, which is that we're much more spread out than a lot of these countries. So we've had a slower transmission.
Korea is a much more densely. It's about the size of Indiana, and there's 50 million people there.
Yeah,
So I lived there, so I know a little bit about it. So South Korea, yeah.
Right.
But yeah, that's a densely, especially in the Seoul area, is a densely populated part of the world. 20 million people, and right.
Yeah.
So that affects it when people are living. When a country is that densely populated, people are more likely to live in a smaller apartment with more people, right? There's a density in their living spaces. You go into buildings, there's more elevators, more, right? Things like
But the
that.
difference is
It's,
huge. Like South Korea has 75 dead people. I think South Korea and Italy are probably a comparable population. I mean,
Well, also
good
there was a
question.
huge influx
Italy's a higher population. The density is probably higher in Korea, if I had to guess, but not much, right?
There's also a large influx of Chinese people into Italy right before this happened from the fashion industry.
Is that true?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
But the connections between South Korea and China are huge.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're constantly trading, and I remember
There's
the
just
airport.
a lot going on.
Yeah, well, I don't know what you're talking. Are you talking about total or what? Just total deaths?
75 dead.
In Italy are
75
surprisingly
dead.
high, and the total deaths in.
Well, everyone in China smokes too. They have a horrible death rate with this thing compared to other countries. I mean, there's like 6 or 7 different variables you have to consider.
Yeah,
for why it would
apparently
be different.
smoking is not good for it transmitting or something. Apparently,
It's a
I read
respiratory
that
virus that gloms onto your
but it doesn't.
lungs
It doesn't. CJ you were saying yesterday that it transmits by touch and then gets into your lungs.
No, it's turning. There was
mostly
some
droplet form.
Yeah.
And that the data from when we talked, it looked
Had
like
changed. Yeah, sometimes
more,
that happens.
Oh
Right.
yeah, it looked like it was much more like it's air droplets. It's not aerosolized. It's not airborne, but it's droplets in the air.
Yeah, which is why social distancing is working.
Yeah. No, I mean, just about any disease, most diseases are transmitted from one person to another person, whether it's sexually or coughing or touching or whatever. So if you keep away from people, that's just a natural, right? That's normal, right?
Taiwan also had an amazingly low overall
death rate.
Infection rate.
Yeah.
They had 1 death, right?
1 death.
Just
Yeah.
crazy low.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now the interesting question mark is what's going on in North Korea because there's no data. Like, I wonder if it's worse than China.
1 death.
North Korea has almost no things coming in and out of the country too, right? So they may have no cases simply because there's so little interaction with the rest of the world. Right.
It's possible. There's also all this done in the
there are a lot of interactions with China. They have a lot.
Yes. Well, there are more interactions with China than other places, but I doubt there are more interactions between China and North Korea than there are between Japan and China. Right. I bet there's more trade. I bet there are more business people going between Tokyo and Beijing all the time.
I'm not even so sure about that. The contact between Pyongyang and Beijing is enormous. The travel.
Yeah, but it's still, to think of how small the economy is there, CJ. That means a lot less movement between, it's a tiny economy. Its economy is like fucking minuscule. The island of Montreal probably has a larger economy than fucking North Korea. Right? Right? And doesn't that have an effect on the interactions? When you have more, right?
Jason,
yeah, maybe not.
In denominated in dollars, it's hard to. I know I'm being a little bit argumentative, but they have
please argue with me.
Enormous weapons and they have enormous industry that is a giant economy all by itself. Like really,
you're also correct that one business guy who comes and invests $1 billion or something is only one individual. Right, like you can have the number of dollars might not be correlated with the number of individuals that cross the border, right? Like if there could be Japanese business guys and only a few of them that are going back and forth.
I lived in trade. There were almost no Chinese people around.
Yeah, but Japan has nobody from outside the country. They don't want anybody.
No, there were a lot.
South Korea too has no immigrants.
There were a lot of Koreans. There were a lot of oddly Iranians.
Yeah.
And a lot of Americans, Canadians, British, and New Zealanders.
They're called expats. Yeah, but Japan and South Korea are such interesting cases of just countries with no diversity or immigration or
Japan is weird though because
the concept of an immigrant society is just utterly foreign to them. It's like we just never do that. I remember in South Korea when I was there. Like I don't know if you know this, Andrew. I'm sure CJ knows this, but if you're born in South Korea or Japan, that doesn't mean you're a citizen of either of those countries, right? There's no birthright citizenship at all in Asia, right? So, so if you're to be a Korean, you have to be of ethnic, like a Korean citizen, right? So you can have moved to Korea from Japan after your family has lived in Japan for 100 years or something, right? Ethnic Koreans and get Korean citizenship, but some guy who's born in Korea of two foreign parents is not a Korean citizen, right? This is how the laws work. They did grant citizenship once to a non-ethnic Korean. It was a Russian guy who was born in South Korea and he grew up there, of Russian parents, but he, spoke Korean perfectly and everything. And he was a soccer player, and so they wanted him to play on the South Korean soccer team, so they gave him the citizenship, right? Yeah. Anyway, that's a bit of a side diversion there, but anyway.
Well, Japan's weird because they have a bunch of deaths, but they have hardly any cases, so they have a really whacked number. I don't think you could even read into some of this stuff.
Again, that may have something. I suspect the age demographic may have something to do with this.
Oh, definitely.
Right?
But it does. But it's like there's a danger of reading too much into any one variable.
Fair enough.
Because there's so many variables.
Both Italy and Japan are both old populations, especially Japan. Right, their age demographics they have a lot of old people. I think Japan has the highest number of octogenarians in the world or something.
Yeah. Well, most of the deaths in the U.S. were from one nursing home right now.
Is that right? Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's most, but it's at least a plurality.
22 people died. It was so astounding.
Wow.
And there's only been 40 deaths in the whole country.
Yeah. Wow. And there was only there wasn't even, I don't even think there was even 100 people in the whole nursing home. Like I think, less than that. I think there was just a few dozen people in there.
Yeah, no, it just went through a wildfire.
Is that the one that's in Seattle? I heard there was one in
That's
Washington,
when my grandma actually was
Seattle, and Vancouver. There was a bunch that died in Vancouver as well. I heard from my cousin who's from Vancouver. So, is that true?
Yeah. No, my grandma was in this nursing home. She lived in Seattle, but it's like King County.
Mm-hmm. Wow. She okay?
Oh, she's been dead for like 10 years. So.
Oh, okay.
So
the coronavirus didn't kill her.
So she's
right.
She's very immune to the coronavirus.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, she was an early adopter of it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, she made it to 90. So.
Oh, okay. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good run. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
no,
I don't know.
I just think that my takeaway is that there's a lot of data and a lot of ways to interpret it, but I think that this could be going in an okay direction if it stays how it's going.
It does. I think you're probably right, and it's probably partly to do with just the last 48 hours have been this just whiplash reaction all over the world.
Yeah.
Just like it was fast,
I hate to make the cliched qualifier that I don't like Trump, but I don't like Trump. But that being said, I think this has been very politicized because of Trump in a way that is they're really disregarding the good steps that have been taken and some of the progress.
Yeah.
And Anthony Fauci is like the smartest guy in the world to be dealing with this.
Who's he?
He's the head of he's the one you're seeing basically in every news interview about this.
Okay.
He runs the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Disease. And he's been basically on the front lines of this stuff since like AIDS and everything. And he's, he's very serious and concerned about it, but he's also trying to like the CDC. This is why we haven't canceled our trip yet. Is they're saying you can travel if you're young and it's domestic, and that's going to come down to just
you would be flying, which I guess it's just being in airports is something, right?
But they're apparently ghost towns right now, so we'll see.
Well, kind of fun actually, in a way. I mean, that would be kind of fun. I mean,
being in an empty airport,
but I think we're gonna not do that.
What's that?
We're gonna go on a submarine, but I think we're gonna scratch that.
Yeah.
But we're gonna be going
with a whole bunch of old Italians.
Yeah.
Chinese,
maybe some Japanese. You're going to Hawaii, right? There's going to be lots of Japanese tourists there, right?
Well, in Maui, they've had virtually nothing. They've kind of locked everything down at Honolulu. So, we're currently kind of on the fence, but I'm not seeing the like total red flag don't go yet. What would suck is if all the bars and restaurants close, then I don't even want to bother.
Yeah.
They might well because
Yeah.
We're gonna watch.
Yeah. Yeah. On the other hand, there'd be food. You could get food and just cook,
Well,
you know,
saw
do it in the hotel room and
it was-
whatnot, right?
I mean, they just closed in California just minutes ago. They
Yeah.
closed everything.
They're keeping bars open in Montreal. I'm not surprised about that. Somehow,
Well, the other
closing down
consideration
bars
is
in Montreal doesn't seem like something the government wants to do, right?
if we
It'd be like
get our-
a revolution.
the airplane prices have been cut in half, so
Yeah.
I might be able to get half the price on the flight. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I heard that there are empty flights right now because they're in Europe because there are some routes in order to keep the right from that airline, like, I don't know, Paris to London or whatever. They have to fly the plane, like a certain number per month or something. So apparently these planes, hardly anybody on them that they're flying, just to make sure they don't lose their slot to another. It was something that was one of the many articles circulating around, about this weird distortions that are happening, to the economy as a result. Strange,
Yeah, the economic situation is going to be really interesting. I'm being a little opportunistic, I have to admit, and
buying stocks.
yeah, buying a
Buy
lot.
them now. Yeah,
I'm buying them all the way down. Even like I know I'm going to lose a little money in the short term because it's hard to predict the bottom. But
well, you can't help but be a greedy capitalist, right?
no, it's just well, you know what it is I've wanted to buy stocks for a while, and the economy's too good. Nothing's cheap.
Right.
The first time things have actually been on sale.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've heard my cousin was telling me, what was it, Boeing, because he's a pilot, was dropped from 300 down to 140 or something just the last couple of days.
I bought a bunch of American Airline, which is like half price right now, and I even bought Carnival Cruise just for the fuck of it. Like, why not?
Yeah.
See what happens.
Everything, all that stuff will recorrect.
I'm not convinced with the cruise ships how much they'll come. Like, I know they're not going to go out of business, but this could be a permanent ding to the kind of culture.
Why?
I just think people are going to be more skeptical about the safety of them. Like,
But
maybe
I mean, it's this is a one-time hell. I mean, we're not going to live in permanent fear of the coronavirus, right?
no, but I think that it could change the way people view it. I mean, I'm not
View what? View the virus.
going on a cruise. Like,
You think?
I
Yeah,
it's just
wonder.
my impression of people. I don't really have I've never gone on a cruise, so I don't have an opinion on if I'd want to go on a cruise.
CJ, I think, is the only one of us who's actually been on cruises. I've never been.
She's just like a cruiseaholic.
Yeah.
I could imagine them, installing like scrubbers and stuff in the cruise ship.
Right.
That-
Right.
Well, this is like airplanes apparently have basic, HEPA filters and everything in the air. Like, it's very safe, whereas a cruise ship isn't. Like,
Right.
they don't have this kind of.
I can see them doing similar things in the ventilation systems in cruise ships that they do in airplanes,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and then getting much more into fumigating. They could do things like fumigate all of the public areas, for a couple hours every night. They could do some stuff like that. All they need to do is close them off and then pump some,
Chemicals.
poisons in there, and then flush it out every night.
When you-
right?
Fumigate for bacteria or insects, like, I mean,
Virus.
viruses, right? Can you do that? Can you fumigate and kill a virus? Is that
Sure. I think so.
Yeah.
I mean,
okay.
I know viruses are very, like, especially this one's a very.
They're pretty rugged.
A lot easier than fumigating for almost anything else because they're so
Yeah.
fragile.
Yeah, that's true.
But this virus
Good
is
point.
particularly vulnerable to soap because
Really?
of the lipid layer that keeps it alive.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
So
but I'm
they-
not
just the
talking about.
grease.
So I'm talking about blowing stuff into the air. Like there were pictures
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Right. That's what I mean. I don't know.
blowing,
If there's
blowing fumigation stuff through the neighborhood. Fumigating the streets and stuff. So I mean,
Yeah.
what they were.
Yeah.
Maybe it was entirely propaganda, but in theory, this is such a fragile. Any virus is so fragile. You just find the right chemical. You don't need much of it.
Yeah.
Kills it.
Well,
Yeah.
to pivot a little, I think the interesting thing now is that in any other year, the election would be almost a slam dunk to beat Trump based on this, just from the perception. But they've picked such a bad candidate. That I
Who
don't.
is the candidate?
It's
I
Biden.
mean, is it?
There's no way Bernie's
It's
going to
going to
win.
be Biden. Is that
Oh,
for sure?
100%. I would bet
I'm
all
not
my
sure.
life on that.
I mean, is it really? Okay. I mean,
There's
you
no
know
way.
more about it than me. So.
I mean, look, he's way ahead in the delegates, and nobody supports Bernie. Even Andrew Yang endorsed Biden. So,
Yeah.
I mean, they're all trying to kind of get
He has
behind
no
him.
friends. He has absolutely no friends in the Democratic Party. It's kind of
Right.
weird.
Well, it's his
It
weakest
may
thing.
be. One possible explanation might be that they sort of know that whoever gets put up there is going to lose, so they don't want to put someone up who might have a career. That's not Bernie Sanders' case, but Bernie Sanders, like, he would sort of tarnish his reputation, his legacy, right? If he were to stand against Trump and lose, right? He'd be the guy, right? He'd be the guy who Trump beat. That's one possible explanation, right?
I think
That they
Sanders
kind of
goes
know,
too
right?
far for a lot of people. I mean, even though I like him more than you, CJ, I think he's also very. He goes too hard left for most of the establishment. Like, I don't even know why he calls himself a democratic socialist. It's totally unproductive to his agenda.
Yeah,
Well,
he's
what should he call himself? A
he's
socialist?
Liberal
Just a
Democrat.
straight social?
a liberal.
No,
A
just
liberal Democrat? He's not a liberal.
yeah,
He's not a liberal. That's not a liberal.
it
I
is
mean,
in the U.S.
Oh, okay. Right.
I
Okay.
mean,
Because I call
I'm talking
myself
about
a
U.S.
liberal.
politics, right?
I'm using like liberal in the sense of, freedom and open.
No.
Yeah, but
that
like
kind of
classical
stuff.
liberal means like you're a Republican,
Right.
basically.
Okay. So I'm a classical liberal then.
Yeah, which means
All
you're
right.
kind of right wing, right?
Yeah, I don't understand how I find that label that I hear that I find that's not offensive is the wrong word. I find that bizarre because if you believe in people, being able to, just fend for themselves and speak for themselves and standing up
Oh
for the
my God.
rights of
You sound-
individuals,
you
right?
sound Ruben.
It's like
You're having
Yeah, I know,
no, but how is
doing
that?
the Ruben.
How is that right wing? I mean, why is that considered right wing? I thought the right wing were supposed to be Bible thumping people who wanted to tell people not to have abortions.
I think Ruben
You know,
says this
The
every
last
one of
30
his
years.
right? No, but I mean, it's like because I'm not. I don't consider myself right wing at all. I'm in favor of like freedom of gays to get married, and I'm married to a black person, and you know what I mean. Like it's like
Yeah. Well, this is it's almost a
I
different
speak three
discussion.
languages. Like I mean, the idea that I'm right wing makes no sense, and yet
This
somehow,
is yeah. I don't know how far we could go into this, but like this is like the
well, we
Rubin
might
thing.
as well. Yeah.
I mean, you might as well pick good things about the right wing to say, like, okay, if you don't support a minimum wage, we could talk about that more if we go into it in more depth, but there's an economic arguments for and against it, right? And saying you're against it's more of a right wing thing. It doesn't mean it's bad. It's just more of a right wing policy. Picking gay marriage or something is just like those are so accepted now socially that it's like a straw man to say that makes you not right wing.
It's hard to find a Republican who's against gay marriage other than
Exactly.
other
Yeah.
than
Or it's against or it's like
Well, what about abortion?
or something.
Right.
Well, that's
What about
saying
abortion?
almost the same
prejudice,
thing.
though.
To do with religion.
No, but that's abortion is still a divisive issue, right?
Yeah,
Right.
There's still like I mean like let me just
But there's
say
no
something
right
else.
theory behind it, right?
No, there is a logic. Like I've learned, like when I was younger, I assumed that if you were against abortion, you were anti-woman and you hated, single mothers or people who might, or whatever. You were just a bad person. And then I sort of started to, and then one thing that probably I'm still in favor of choice, by the way, just to be clear. I think women should be allowed to choose what to do with their bodies. But one thing that sort of made me really wake up is that I don't think it has to do with hatred of women, because a lot of women are against abortion. Like there are people who, and the reason there's a logic to it, right? It's that in some cultures or for some individuals, if there's an individual, a baby or a fetus that might be able to be turned into a good person or any kind of a person, you should do everything you can to try and help that thing to come to fruition, right? Like, I mean, that's the theory. That's the logic behind it. It's actually a very logical argument, right?
Yeah, but you're saying it's not about hating women, but that's completely unknowable. It totally depends on who's pushing that agenda forward. I'm convinced there are people who hate women who push that agenda forward.
Oh, that's possible,
And
yeah.
I'm
But
convinced that there's
but
people
what about
who
women who
genuinely like it?
But no, my point is that it's often portrayed that if a person is against abortion, that person must be misogynist, right?
I think it's more of a
It's
correlation, right? Like there's people, like another example would be there's people who are skeptical of climate change for good reason, but most people who aren't. So it's like a stereotype, but stereotypes can be
So
true,
what
right?
percentage, if you took the totality of people who would press against abortion if there was a referendum, how many of them are misogynists? Is it 10%? Is it
I think that's
50%?
unknowable.
Is it
I think it's not
1%?
going to be trivial though. I think
Right.
it's
Well, I mean, it's because there's a difference if it's 20% versus 0.5% or something, and I think it's down in the very below
It's not
single
that
digits.
unknowable. You could ask on the same question, same question. You could ask something evocative like, "Do you think the women's role is in the home?" Or you could ask some sort of peripheral questions that get you toward whether or not you believe it.
maybe. I mean, what I was trying to say earlier though is just that I think that the abortion issue or something is in the right wing bucket of policy, just kind of through historical reasons. I don't think it's part of right wing uh, economic philosophy or something. It's
Oh,
just
it
kind of
has nothing to do with economics.
yeah,
I
it's just
mean,
kind of tied
clearly
in there.
not.
Whereas
But I don't
right
even like.
wingness
I
has to
don't
do
think there
more.
are such thing. I don't think there are such thing as right wing economics. I mean, there might be
Sure, more classical
there
economics.
might be a different view of the role of the government in the the how far the government should intervene in the economy that would skew right and left,
Yeah, I would
right?
say that's fair to say that's more
Um,
of a right left wing
yeah,
spectrum.
right. And that also gets to the other axis of how much you believe in individual rights versus authoritarianism, right? There's a separate axis there that I think is probably more important, right?
Right. Well,
One of the
it's
things I
four
find myself
axes, right?
disagreeing with most strongly of the often with the left, but also with the right, is just the idea that that there should be an individual or a government who's powerful and in control over individuals' lives, right? That I think a lot of people just sort of naturally lean towards, right? Left or right, right? It seems
Yeah,
to
well,
me.
that's why it's four axes. It's authoritarianism and
Yeah,
left and right
and
wing, and
I'm way down on the individual side, whatever side that's on, right? Regardless of what color that person's skin is, or whether that person has a penis or a vagina, or
yeah,
or
I
what
don't even
citizen nation person comes from, even. So,
I don't really even believe in that spectrum being that useful for my
no.
personal politics. I think that what we have right now is pretty much what we should have, and it needs like some tuning, which is like basically a free market system with a social safety net, and all the kind of theory about right and left wing are just tuning it, you know.
Yeah, the problem with that is that every time you're tweaking that thing, that's smart as the person or government bureaucrat team or team of experts or whatever it is. Let's say you have 100 people in that office and they're all excellent economists and they set up the program. They're not as smart as the millions of people who are going to react to that, right? Like
I mean,
hundreds of
well,
millions of people, they're
they're
going to be
not as
affected by that
correct.
policy. They're going to change their behavior as a consequence, and they're going to think of things that were never thought of, right? The other thing is those 100 people are going to want to maintain their positions, right? They're going to create a bureaucracy, and then 50 years later, when whatever it is they were trying to solve is no longer an issue, that thing is still going to exist. That government
So sure,
entity,
there's a great argument
that's
against that,
right.
but there's also the counterfactual of if you don't have any of that, what happens, right? Like just because
Well,
certain
yeah, I
things have
mean,
big bureaucracies or inefficiencies doesn't mean we should have a total like libertarian society.
well, it's not about inefficiencies, just as it's. I mean, it's who's paying for those inefficiencies, right? You're going to have inefficiencies and stupidities always, right? I mean, go into a little, you know, dep in a store, and I mean, there's going to be some inefficiency there, right? I mean, who's going to pay for that? That guy who owns that store, right? Not you, right? It's his
Right.
fault if something goes wrong, right? I don't know. The one of the main problems is the information. The information that's dispersed over millions of brains is impossible to know, and it's a big problem for any central agency to try and imagine what those thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of people are going to want or need, right?
Right. Well, that's why we have
It's
government
like,
programs. They need to be designed in a really robust way, not a really like a situational way. Like you
No,
don't
but
want to
they're
react.
always situational. They're always reactive and situational. Like, I mean, can you give an example of something that isn't reactive, a government program? I can't think of one.
Well, just having like
Right.
a tax structure, right? Like that can adjust. It's a pretty robust system. I mean,
Yeah.
my problems with the way taxes are done, but it works. I mean,
Yeah. I'm not one of these libertarians who thinks that tax is theft. I mean, I think the best
I'm
in my
I'm also
world, the
just seeing
best
the
way to run. Yeah.
infrastructure.
Yeah.
That's
You
actually
know,
funny because I was talking to Pearl and I actually took the libertarian perspective. I said, "Well, taxation is theft," and she was like, "What? How is that
Technically, it
so?"
is. Yeah.
And I said,
Yeah.
"Well, because somebody takes your money away from you
Without your permission.
without your
You
permission,
don't
and
want
you
to
have
give it
no
to
option
them.
in the
Yeah, that's
matter."
right. And under threat of force. I
Under
mean,
threat of
literally
right.
under threat of
that's
force.
the
It's
Right.
just
definition of theft. And
sure. It also
It's
means if
true.
there isn't theft, the world's a lot worse.
it doesn't matter what they're gonna do. If Robert took your money away from you and you used it to feed his family, and that was a very
Yeah. It's still stealing from you.
I think programs
That's
also are
true.
kind of like or government interventions. It's kind of like special effects in movies, which is you only notice it when it's bad. You know, like when things go smoothly and work and agencies work, you just kind of take it for granted.
yeah.
But when there's things to criticize about it, then
Yeah,
it
well,
becomes very
they
clear.
also tend to work better when things are well, not better, but less badly. They can be masked when things are growing economically for other reasons, right? So you can have as long as you have growth in the economy generally, these heavy bloated systems can kind of limp along, That's kind of
But I
what
mean,
we
like
have.
something
We
like the
have like
financial.
all over the Western world, we have these bloated governmental systems that don't work very well, but we have just enough innovation and openness that we can mitigate it, right?
Yeah, but you also get things like the financial crisis in 2008, which, I mean, I would assume you'd think that you need to have government intervention there.
Well, you see, the problem, and I take a different view of that, is one of the reasons why it was so bad, my theory, at least from looking at that, is that for repeatedly going back to, well, not quite the 19th century, but at least back to the big 1929 crash is, a moral hazard problem of bailouts, savings and loans. And it's impossible to know how much of the recklessness by investors is spurred by the idea that, well, if things get really bad, there's going to be bailouts, right? You don't know if the whole system is basically already
Yeah.
skewed onto some,
Right.
I'm not sure. I think
But we do have
it might be
evidence.
better to let it just go and then
No.
have
But
it
that's an
correct
interesting one.
itself.
Way.
But we do have some interesting data about this particularly from the UK and way back in like I think the 1700s or perhaps even 1600s, when there was absolutely no notion of the government had no ability to bail out.
Yeah.
There was,
Well, the
like,
idea that it would have just perplexed those people. Like, what, the government would give those investors money? Like, what? Like, what are you, crazy? Like,
yeah, there was
right.
no functional, there was no treasury, but there were banks, right? And there were runs on banks, and there were bank failures, and there were bank collapses,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of data that suggests that every time that there was tremendous damage done to life and limb. Of course, it was tough times.
Yeah.
Then.
Yeah.
No,
Well,
but
also the
world
whole
was
thing with the
so much
bailout is that
poorer. The world was so much poorer in those days.
I know.
We don't even have any understanding how much poorer the world was.
right, but you had to
be-
bail them out in
right.
2008. Like you would have brought down the whole monetary system if
Why?
you hadn't.
Why?
Well,
I mean,
look,
what exactly would have happened? So the monetary system would it have disappeared? Would we not have a monetary system now?
I don't know.
Really?
I mean, you're really playing with fire. I mean, look,
But I just
you don't
we're
need
playing
to.
with fire, so I can understand a house.
But
can
why
be
do you
burned
need
down,
to
But I just want to.
Why do you need to do
understand
this
what would
thing where
happen.
you're preemptively stopping a bailout? Like you can trace that crash to a lot of very specific deregulation that isn't very controversial. I mean, the fact that AIG wasn't actually required to back up any of this insurance on any of these, you know, um, mortgage-backed securities or subprime mortgages, and the fact that they weren't having a very high burden of proof for loaning to people. Like all of that stuff was new. That was done under Clinton and Bush. So to the solution of letting like the whole thing burned to the ground just seems like a crazy way to deal with it when you actually deal with
I'm not
regulation.
really. Yeah, I don't know. It's more the let burn to the ground. First of all, I'd like to understand what that means, but it's not that I would want, just to be clear about my position. I'm not even sure I'm in favor of that. Like I'm playing kind of a devil's advocate here, but it might have been better for the long term if that moral hazard had somehow been corrected there. That moral hazard problem of because those bailouts, you can go back through the lists of them that go back, decade after decade after decade of interventions and bailouts, and it's kind of, and then we did it again, right?
Right, but I think at the point
So
where you're
is it
having
what's going to happen?
this,
Is it going to just boom? Is that going to just continue without? I mean, what are there other?
if you're
Why
actually going to
don't we do
decide
that
on
in
a
other
bailout,
industries, right?
if you're having to decide that, you've already let it get out of hand, right? Like the choice shouldn't be like bailout or no bailout. It should be preventing the whole situation from happening in the first place, which could have
Yeah,
been
but of
done.
course, but that of course, but I mean, that's always the case. I mean, that's just, of course, you should always try and prevent something, but there are times when regardless of how much. The other thing is, if you try so hard to prevent things, this is the Soviet problem, right? You try so hard to control everything and prevent it, you
There were no
grind
potential
things down.
collapses or even recessions in Soviet Union until it all fell apart.
That's right. Yeah, it was never. It was just
prevented them all
ground down.
No crashes. That's what the whole Great Moderation is: smaller crashes and booms and things. This was not.
Well, here, Andrew,
small
let me just give you an interesting statistic about that time. Here in Quebec is about 23% of the Canadian population. It's always been weaker economically than the rest of the country, and most of the rest of the country. Okay? It's always been lagged behind. It drags down Canadian GDP as a result. Now, nobody knows why that is, but one thing that I do know is it has an enormous government sector at this point. Okay, and Quebec has always had, going back as long as we've been measuring unemployment, it's always had higher unemployment than other parts of Canada, most other places in Canada, right? Okay, so the crash comes along in 2008, and all of a sudden, unemployment barely ticks up here. It just sort of pushes up a little bit, right? And then everywhere else, other parts of Canada and everything that comes going down, flying through the roof, and people aren't working, and there's all this, And so you think maybe there's something there, and yet things were kind of calm here. For the first time in my life, unemployment was significantly lower here in Quebec than other places. So you wonder if it's what CJ was saying about the Soviet Union. You have a deeply intervened economy that we have, and that suppresses growth most of the time, right? We don't have as much general growth as other parts of the country. But when a crisis happens, okay, things are smoother going through it, right?
Yeah, but I'm not talking about
I don't
deeply.
know.
I'm not talking about deeply intervened economy. I'm talking about like literally a couple of like Glass-Steagall was repealed by Clinton.
It might be a choice. Like it might actually be that choice. It might be you have the
arguing
choice
about
between
degree,
having,
but the fundamental argument is the same. The more you intervene, the more you restrict the economy.
Do you think insurance companies should be regulated at all?
I don't know. I don't know that they need to be if there's a competitive market for insurance, right? I mean, as long as you can choose to buy from different companies.
No, but I'm going to side with Andrew on this one because it's about experts and the general public. You can't expect the public to become experts in understanding fiduciary responsibility, risk, and all the other things that you have to figure out when you're buying insurance. You have to assume it's just like going to the gas station and saying, do you think this gas is going to ruin my car or not? No, you look at it and the pump says approved. There's a little seal right on the pump that says the government tests it. Right?
But why those things can occur in a free market? The gas stations that sell crappy gasoline, people are going to stop going. Why do you think Heinz ketchup came along? Heinz ketchup came along because long before there was food regulations, people used to make their own ketchups. They buy them and sell them. And over time, as things were made further away from those villages, you had tainted foods. It was hard to know what was going to be something that wouldn't make you sick. So people started buying recognizable brands. That was one of the things you were paying for, right? Like you bought a bottle of Heinz ketchup in 1910 in Chicago, you would know that you weren't going to get sick when you came home and put it on your burger, right? And so, I'm not sure that those things can't occur. Where there is actual
economic argument starts with this and says, okay, well, the market will regulate all this stuff, and then the next argument is always what about externalities? No, but the example of pollution or whatever, right? There's always, I mean, that's pretty uncontroversial that there's externalities that need to be dealt with in a different way than a market system. And there was a massive externality with the financial crash, which had to be addressed. So, I mean, I'm not talking about a deeply embedded I'm talking about like a few regulations that were very common sense that were removed that could probably have stopped that and still allowed a massive growth in that time. Like people
It's
made a
easy to
ton of money
point to those
investing
in
in.
hindsight. It's easy to point to those in hindsight. It's also true that the Keynesian system all over the Western world by the 1970s had even the American economy was so heavily intervened that things had ground down. So it's possible when those were lifted, they were just lifting things because there were so many things holding down growth, right? And they just were
But
like, okay, lift these too, and it was a mistake, maybe, like maybe. I mean, maybe that was
let's
a
look at
So
mistake, right?
actual
that was
history though. When you look at like something like what happened with AIG, do you think there would have been an actual negative effect to them having to back up all of the assets they were insuring? Like,
Oh,
what's the
I should
major
say that
downside?
any sort of backup or like let's take the amount of money you have to keep as a percentage compared to how much and you know if you had to have every single dollar in your account that you're lending out, that would be safer than if you had a 10% leverage or right. I
What
mean
about
every percent of leverage you go higher, you're raising the risk, of course.
right? And we've
No, but
figured out that the
that's like what
percentage of
you
your
were saying.
insurance
It's one of those
companies.
like, you know, it's one of those like straw man. Or of course that's true, except that is it worth it? Again, it goes back to it's gonna slow things down. Every little bit's gonna chip it down, make it less, right? And so, okay, you know, maybe it'll definitely help with that, but then you'll have this other effect, right? Probably,
Well, we're either in a world where
right?
we're talking about what's the sensible regulation, or we're in a world where we're saying there shouldn't ever be any. And
no.
once you agree that there should be some, then it's just a matter of looking at history and figuring out
I
what
don't
was
know.
the best.
I think that if there is going to be an axiom, then as a general rule, the more you intervene, the more likely you are to create unintended consequences, and the more likely you are to screw things up, the more likely you are to create bureaucracies that are no longer necessary after 10 or 15 years, and the more likely you are, you know, and so as a
Yeah, but I mean, the
rule,
more you
that,
eat, the heavier you get, but you need to eat some. Like,
yeah,
it's not a
no,
spectrum.
because again, I'm not taking a position on the like I don't think I would say like that the government should never do it. There shouldn't be a like I have friends who are anarchists. Like I have actual friends who really believe there shouldn't
Right?
be any government, right? Okay, I'm not that far. And then
Oh
I
yeah,
have
and
other friends who are
that's what I really
communists, but you
dislike
know.
is even having a this idea of like going either direction. A spectrum is better. Like everything that seems to have worked in civilization is about balancing multiple factors in the
Yeah.
way that works the
Well,
best. That's how
what I would
evolution works. That's how everything
just
works.
just to answer your question, what I would say is that I would start with the assumption that if the government's going to do something, the basic thing it should be doing is security, right? That's what government should be protecting the population from external threats, so an army, right, and internal threats, you know, policing and things like that, and security in the streets and whatnot. That should be the basis of it. That privatizing the army is kind of a bad idea because you know if you have private armies that compete, because then of course the incentive is for them to create more wars because they can gain influence, right? But that's so you start from there. There's not a lot more than that I can see that
Roads,
much intervention.
hospitals. I mean, where
Roads, I mean, it's not obvious to me that they have to be, I mean, you know, 100%. Like, why can't you have structure? I don't know. I'm just, even then,
This is an
like
odd
some
one. This is an
socialization
odd
well,
one
there
works,
because
are
but
toll
some,
roads
you
though.
know,
Like
Canada is definitely more socialized than America. But what's
hugely
fascinating
more
to
so.
me, but what's fascinating is
Quebec, particularly.
in Ontario, at least, they're starting to privatize the roads, like in a very serious way. Like there's
Yeah,
serious
yeah.
but why
processes.
does everything that happens have to be indication of some like full-on embrace of an ideology? Like small changes can just happen in different
No,
directions.
no, but small changes are where everything happens. All economics are microeconomics, right?
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
slippery slope arguments are
there's no
pretty
such thing
bad.
as there's no such thing as microeconomics and then the macro thing. It's all the same thing, the same incentive structures and everything. So, if there's a trend towards a movement, like to speak to CJ's point, right? If there's that may mean something. It may mean something. Like Scandinavia, you can look at Scandinavia, right? There's been tons of talk about Scandinavia because of Bernard Sanders, right?
Mhm.
And when you know the idea that they are socialist countries is just it's just not true. I mean, if anything, they tried to do that in the 60s and 70s, and it was a disaster. Like didn't work. Luckily, they didn't go full on like the Soviet Union and take away the right of private property. Right, that's the clear definition of socialism, which is
No, it's
They
a clear
remain
definition of
democratic. And
authoritarian
they,
socialism.
yeah. Well, in the strict sense, socialism or communism, if you take the other term for it, is the idea that owning property leads to people accumulating too much property compared to somebody else, which is wrong, right? That's the theory. So therefore, if you get rid of the idea that an individual can own, a person can own that, then you'll solve the problem. Give it to everybody, right? That's the theory behind it,
Well,
right?
there's also like if you look at something like the mathematical equation you use for like how rapid any breeding population works, right? It's an equation where the result is factored back into the equation, so it's a feedback loop, and that's how you get stable systems is feedback loops. So like the amount of regulation or deregulation or privatization, those should all be feedback loops in the society. They shouldn't be like ideological axioms. Like that's just going to lead to some dystopia either way. You can't
Yeah.
have pure socialism, pure market. Like none of that's going to work. You need something that's very fine tuned to react to what's actually happening.
Well, I'm not arguing for an anarchist system whereby where there's no, again, the government should provide, in my opinion, security. Also, courts where there are people who disagree, they can
Oh,
address
sure.
themselves to because I believe I have friends who believe in competitive courts. There
Oh,
should
I've
be
heard these
multiple
arguments.
court
They're
systems,
they're completely
right?
ridiculous.
I personally don't agree with that, but like I mean, just like this is where I am on that spectrum. Like the idea that if I get into a dispute with my neighbor, that there should be the Crown or some place that I can go, who's a third party, and you can socialize that, right? I mean, not that it won't work that much better than a private system, but it will be less bad, right? Because there will still be all sorts of all kinds of problems with that, but it'd be I believe that humans are flawed, right?
Yeah.
So
Well,
the
do you think
more
there's
power you centralize, that you get more problems you're going to get because of the flaws of humans, right? So
so do you even think that the Fed should exist or that there should be monetary policy?
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I do know that the system. I've tried to learn about this. Very hard to understand what happened, but the reason why the Fed had to be created was because of something Andrew Jackson did, which never happened in this country. And it's very unclear to me how this works. But what about Bitcoin? Should Bitcoin be taken over by
Wait. Carry on with that thought.
right?
What did Andrew Jackson have to deal with?
Andrew Jackson, he broke apart a bunch of these. He was a populist, and there were these bankers who controlled the distribution of money that everybody deferred to. This is my understanding of it. And they
Like
had,
for interest rates or something?
yeah, and everything, but it was a private system, but it was kind of it was winked at by the government, but it was
Well, I
it was
can
basically
expand on this a little bit. I've been to two places. If you go to, it's fascinating actually. If you go to Scotland, of all places, and you get a pound, you will get different pound notes.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
the different banks. It is the weirdest.
Scottish pounds.
No. It doesn't say Scottish pound. It says Bank of Scotland, and then the
Oh,
next
yeah,
one you get
right.
says Royal
Bank of
Scotland.
Glasgow or
The
something.
next one,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
no, there's only 3 or 4 of the big banks, but they're different pound notes with
Right.
different pictures, come from
Yeah.
different banks. And
Are
this
they
is
all worth
exactly
different
the
amounts?
same thing. This is exactly the same thing in Hong Kong. You get the money depends on which bank you get it from. It's all they've all agreed that
It's
it's
£1.
it's
Right.
the same dollar, the Hong Kong
As
dollar.
the sterling. Yeah. Right.
Right. And in fact, in Scotland's case, they've agreed it's the same as the UK pound. It has the
Right.
exact same
Right.
value and all of it. But it's a vestige of that pre-Jacksonian system where the banks actually controlled the supply of money. And they did it fascinatingly, very responsibly in the cases that they
Yeah.
had to do it. Like in Hong Kong,
Well, because
is the best example probably in our incredible fiscal responsibility on the part of the banks and incredible excellent management of the economy with some bubbles for sure and some crashes, absolutely. And some
partly because of I love your example of Hong Kong because there's a guy who I think I've talked about this guy to you, CJ, who was the governor of Hong Kong. He was Scottish. His name was Cowperthwaite, and he insisted on these very, very liberal policies and everything, and not to intervene.
There's a tremendous parallel between Austrian School of Economics and Scotland. These are peripheral countries against a bigger country.
Yeah.
That is able
That's
to have
interesting.
more independent avenue of thought. And frankly, Canada falls into this category as well. Canadians can be far freer thinking than Americans because they're hitched on the side of America.
Well, we have to worry about, it's,
No, it's because you've got all this perspective. We have a different perspective.
yeah,
but
maybe.
it's close, right? And Austria.
Yeah, I mean, it's
the best
there's
musicians
countless ways.
came out of Austria, and the best economists came out of Austria, and the most
Hayek.
talented fascist came out of Austria, and
Yeah,
and an
that's true.
incredible the best action hero in the world came out of Austria. It's kind of bizarre, like how the hell?
Yeah.
Right? And Scotland is weirdly similar with incredible philosophers and.
Oh my God! Have you ever read Adam Smith?
Yeah.
Andrew, you should read The Wealth of Nations. It's an utterly amazing book. I mean, it's one of those books that you would think, wow, a book written 300 years ago, I'm going to be falling asleep. It's like you can't put it down. It's just utterly gripping how it's written and everything too. It's really
no, I've been learning a lot about economics, and I guess it's it's the beginning of what, like classical economics, right?
He was the well, no, I mean, no, I would say that Adam Smith is the first economist in the sense that he technically was a philosopher, right? But what he was really, because that's the other thing, is what is economics about? It's how do we live more fulfilled lives as people, right? And if we're miserably poor, that's really hard to do, right? If we can barely, if we have to work for 12 hours a day just to barely get enough together to be able to live in a shack and have rags on our backs, that's not a good place to start, right? Right? So he was looking at these things in the context of how do people fulfill their needs and wants and desires more effectively, right? From a philosophical point of view, right? There's a philosophy there too, but it's not classical. Like, I think that he's basically, if you read Adam Smith, it's like Thomas Sowell. He just observes the world. He tried to do his best to examine China. He would pull things together.
He strikes me as about like Darwin, in the sense that he observes. Hey.
I think Thomas Sowell is. I've read a little bit of. I think he's pretty objective. I think he's a little ideological. Like
he has. There's a lot of things I disagree with Thomas Sowell on, but one thing he does that Adam Smith does is that he just goes and collects data. He doesn't do scientific economics. He doesn't run tests like, okay, let's try.
His analysis sometimes seem potentially a little bit shallow, from what I've read.
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure. But basically, the idea there is to go and look at things and see what conclusions can you draw from what exists in the world. That's what Adam Smith is doing, right?
Yeah.
Then you get, after Adam Smith, about 70 years later or whatever, you get Karl Marx, who was also an economist, also thinking of the world through materialistic and economist point of view, but taking a very, very different view, right?
Right.
And then this is what, this dichotomy, and you see Karl Marx, I think, was really the origins of the other side, which is that, the individuals accumulating wealth for their own purposes leads to all these horrible things, right? Like it leads to, business owners who own, like look at, the worst example, of course, is slavery, right? Because,
do you know much about
behavioral
economics?
What do you mean? I mean, people getting paid instead of owning the means to production.
Well, I just mean behavioral economics is like challenging some of the ideas like rational actors or self-regulation.
Like
sort of modern.
Yeah, I've heard of those. Yeah, the idea that humans are rational is somewhat absurd, right? I mean, humans.
But I think that's a
rational.
fundamental axiom to a lot of classical economics is that.
Well, Adam Smith did have the invisible hand, which was the precursors to those ideas. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
He missed out on
the other thing to remember is that even if people are irrational, millions of individuals are likely, even if they're going to be irrational, maybe they have a right to be irrational as they choose to be. Sure. The idea that, Michael Bloomberg not allowing me to drink soda is somehow better than me choosing not to drink soda for myself, right? I think that's
authoritarianism.
Yeah, well, I mean, isn't that isn't that what we mean though by, I mean, if people choose to do stupid things that are bad for them, that's not good. But what are we going to do about that?
Right? It's the same thing I've been saying this whole time, is that it's a balance. I really think.
But I mean, let's say a person, like I don't know. I mean, it's just that we can introduce programs to try and help people who, and education and this and that. But at the end of the day, there are going to be some people who are just going to wreck their lives.
Okay,
right?
well,
and
say there's somebody who um, is taking advantage of somebody, then you can counter that. That's different than someone making informed decisions, right? Like, say cigarettes or something, everyone's smoking them. If you start having public awareness or potentially even banning them, that's countering a lack of information for the person who's engaging in it.
Yeah.
People also
I
don't
mean,
make all their
well,
own
those are two
decisions. It's
different things. I mean,
things
an
that
awareness
habitual.
campaign. Sorry to interrupt, but an awareness campaign is very different from banning them, right? That's.
Oh, sure.
I mean, telling people like if you're smoking these things, these are really bad and everything, and and all that's very different from saying, okay, we're going to stamp the trade out completely, right?
I mean, I don't agree with
That's.
what Bloomberg did with the sodas, but I think there's an argument that exposing people that much, concentrated sugar is a kind of a
It's
public
bad
health
for
hazard.
people, right?
And
Yeah.
I
No,
think it can
it's
form habits that are hard to break that don't just become rational decisions anymore.
yeah. It's just that it's sort
It
of
actually goes all the way to the public safety issue, Jason. Public health is part
Yeah.
of public safety, and that's a government's responsibility to look out for public safety, including it's why you have prohibitions on certain dangerous substances. I mean, of all kinds, because they're dangerous. In a lot of cases, they're dangerous to everybody.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I think we have to distinguish between, if there's a substance where I can use that and it'll actually harm somebody else, like, so you can hurt another person who's innocent, then there's some.
Well, you could argue a little bit with sugar by
connection
saying
there.
if you drink a lot of it, you're going to get diabetic, and then you're going to cost the society a lot of money.
Yeah, regardless of even what health system you
right,
have.
So this is
again,
this is but again, that's because
either it's going to be other insured
Right.
people or it's going to be the public at large.
Yeah. But I mean, this is why, I mean, if you, in a more market-based economy, if you lead an unhealthy life, your premiums will be higher. Doesn't that make more sense? If you're taking, like, right?
I mean, an extremely
Not
market-based
really,
economy.
because if you're not able to pay those premiums, you fall off the private system, and then you fall into the public system, and then it gets even more expensive.
Well, no, but you're
Well, from a
assuming a
market
public system is
perspective, you're
going
not
to
productive.
exist.
Yeah, that's right.
If you're dead.
Because if you don't,
right,
these people are going to die of diabetes on the streets, and we don't allow that as a society. So even the most incredibly market-oriented system, which is the U.S. in terms of healthcare, doesn't allow people to die on the streets as a result of their own stupid action.
Yeah. Plus, if you're in the hospital,
again, that's a distortion. That's created a distortion where the private ones can offload the expensive people onto the public system, right? That's assuming that it's going to be that way, right?
Yes.
Which is effectively what's happening.
That's assumption you can't make and can continue to make. It's not going to change.
There's also
if you have a worker,
there's also the strange issue of cost if somebody's living unhealthily. So in the Czech Republic, and I think I've told you this, CJ, but in the Czech Republic in the 1990s, Philip Morris went in and bought one of the cigarette companies, and or something. And anyway, the government had a public healthcare system. People smoked a lot, and they wanted to raise the taxes on cigarettes. So people, the idea is people would smoke less, and then it would cost less money for the public. So Philip Morris contested this in court, and their argument was, if people continue smoking this much, you're actually going to save money because they're going to die when they're 65 instead of 85. You're not going to have, right? This was a real argument they used in a Czech court, right? And then it became this big battle of the statistics, like which one is right. So all these, these sort of teams of armies of like statisticians and scientists are all studying the data, and they couldn't really dig it out. They couldn't act like it was
They couldn't come to a conclusion. Yeah.
They couldn't come to a conclusion
obscene,
about whether or not, like, because you would assume, oh yeah, people, they're going to die younger. That's going to cost more. In fact, it might be that prolonging people living much longer, than they're going to be unhealthy anyway when they're 90 for 10 years or whatever, right? And by the way, I'm not advocating for this. I'm just saying that even the public cost thing is not obvious, right? It's not obvious that it's going to be cheaper to have people smoke less and drink less, But again, it goes back to, I still think there's some measure of just individual choice, right? I mean, I can't.
It's a trade-off.
I hate the idea of, oh, this is going to cost, everybody else or something, or, it's like, it's my life. I want to be able to do what I want to do, and you should be able to do what you want to do, right?
Yeah, but that argument only holds up as long as it doesn't affect other people. Once it affects other people, you have to
right. But that's my point. Is that even the
and it's very hard to find an action that doesn't affect other people, though.
But that's my point. That's my point. Is that even when people say, "Oh, it's obvious that if you drink soda, you're going to get diabetes," it's going to cause. It might not be. Like it might be that you're saving because you're going to get diabetes. You're going to die when you're 60 instead of 90, right? That's all. It could be. It could be that that's not even an obvious thing, right? For just as the case of diabetes, right? You could go through each one, right?
Right, but are you talking about the actual numbers, or are you prohibiting the
Well,
topic?
I gave the check
Logical
example.
slant?
I gave the check example just to show that in that particular case, something I had always assumed was obvious, that if
Right.
people
No,
smoke, they're going to
all I'm
cost
saying
more to the
is that-
system, you know, because
All
they're
I'm
going to get
saying
lung
is that
cancer.
you're talking about personal choice. We're either weighing the cost and benefits, or we're not, because we're either saying what are the cost and benefits, or we're saying that there's personal choice, so we can't talk about it, right? So it has to be
I'm
one or the
agreeing
other.
with you there.
So once you
I'm
actually
just
cross that line to say what are the benefits, then you've already abandoned the argument that it's about personal freedom, because you're already talking about how do we weight it, right? I can't think of anything where you don't have some sort of cost benefit weighting.
Yeah, well, there's the cost benefit weighting. So you could look at the cost benefit weighting of, okay, this person drinks soda and, you know, whatever, gets diabetes. So there's a cost benefit. There's a question: is that person going to die of diabetes and cost more because he's going to need dialysis to society, or maybe he's going to die 10, 20 years younger? That's a whole cost benefit thing. There's also a cost benefit thing of maybe that guy would lead a much less good life in his mind if he didn't drink sugar drinks. Like maybe he likes sugar drinks, and his life would be worse. Maybe, right?
Well, that's why I actually don't support what Bloomberg literally did, is because there's an enjoyment to it that you have a right to gauge, right? But saying like cigarettes, it's a much harder thing to make that argument.
Do you smoke?
I don't.
Do you smoke? Yeah. So you don't know the pleasure of smoking that
I definitely have. Yeah. No, I've been there. I smoked e-cigarettes. I know that there's a qualitative enjoyment from it that is you can't get anywhere else, right?
I think it goes beyond enjoyment. You may have heard me with this theory, but I believe that this is an important part of anxiety management in the Second World War. I think one of the reasons why
tobacco
stay calm.
Smoking all the time.
But you'll also find if you stop doing it that you normalize more than you would have expected.
Yeah.
In terms of anxiety management.
There's no question that people in Britain and Canadians, people all over the world, smoked a lot more in the 1940s than they do now, and it may have had something to do with the stress management.
They were not very anxious, especially given what was going on.
Yeah.
Well, this is a huge can of worms I don't want to open, but this is why I'm so angry about the anti-vaping stuff. Is they're just lying about that, and that is how you could actually get people to stop smoking cigarettes.
Yeah, but you're assuming a person wants to stop smoking cigarettes.
No, but if they vape,
maybe a person doesn't want to. I mean, some people do want to stop smoking, right? But not everybody.
I'm saying that you could transfer people from smoking cigarettes to vaping, and they'd be much healthier.
Yeah, if the vaping doesn't do the same thing as the smoke somehow. It's weird.
It's because it's not burning anything. There's no carcinogen. There's no tobacco.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the way that I've done it in my life is I'm a very low smoker. Just a couple cigarettes a day, and just I figure, well, this will lower my chances of dying miserably of lung cancer. Maybe I'll get it anyway, but 2 or 3 cigarettes a day.
Argument to be made that your body could actually repair the damage done by a couple cigarettes a day in real time.
Yeah,
I think that's
interesting.
Feasible.
It's so dependent on your genetics. Like it's
it's true. It's really like it seems to be sort of like 75% genetics and maybe 20 something. It seems to be much more weighted in genetics.
There's children that get lung cancer who have never smoked and they die when they're kids. And there's smoke till they're 100, so it doesn't.
It seems like if you have the genetic predisposition, it raises the chances. You could put it that way, right? So if you have the genetic predisposition, you still might not get it. But if you have the genetic predisposition, your chance goes up where it may have happened anyway, or it's very hard to know, right? It's not good for you. I don't want to make it sound like people should smoke or whatever, but there does seem to be something in every individual's genetics about how much they enjoy certain substances, right? So A friend of mine who studies a lot of science, he says you can look at people's genetic markers to see whether or not they'll be prone to enjoy tobacco or enjoy alcohol, right? There are things that are genetic markers they can find. Some like CJ, you hate tobacco. You've always hated nicotine, right?
Yeah.
You know, and my dad too. My dad hates cigarettes.
And then there are
he never enjoyed smoking them.
Who genuinely hate the effect of alcohol. Like they can barely tolerate it.
But
Right,
CJ, do you
like
hate
it,
do you hate the taste and stuff of smoking, or do you hate the feeling of a nicotine high?
Oh,
good
really.
question.
Mostly the feeling.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I bet if you smoked e-cigarettes or chewed the gum for a few months, you'd get fairly comfortably addicted to it in a way that
Well,
you
anybody
wouldn't.
can get addicted to any substance that's
Well, yeah,
addictive.
I don't know, obviously, but I remember the rush and the feeling that I got from smoking was, I mean, I think like Rogan says this too. It made me sick to my stomach and nauseous
it's interesting.
and dizzy, and I couldn't see any part of it that was pleasant. And I tried and
Yeah.
again and again and again.
My dad too, because he grew up in the 50s, right?
Yeah.
You know, way more smoking, right?
Yeah.
And he was so like, I really want to do this thing. Everybody seems to like it, you know. It's like I hate it. I don't know, you know. I don't like the feeling.
I think I've got that genetic, those genetics.
Yeah, no, I got my genetics from my mom. My mom is a smoker, you know, so it's just because my friend Mike he's a really heavy smoker, and he said he looked at his genetic markers, and it's like a spectrum, and he was way over on the side where people love the nicotine or something, right? You know.
Yeah. Well, to go back to the Bloomberg thing, I'd be more comfortable banning cigarettes than I would banning soda. But that's also
you're going to have a black market in in a matter of milliseconds, right? I mean, it's not going to stop. It'll lower usage to some extent. The same way prohibition did lower alcohol usage, right? People didn't have their one beer at dinner, right? They just went to the Blind Pig and got smashed in the middle of the night, you know? So, I mean, maybe I don't understand why banning it would, I don't know. I mean, again, isn't it just a freedom issue? You can say don't smoke in restaurants. We have that now, right? You can't smoke in
you know what you could do? You could
spaces
you could say it's legal to smoke. It's just illegal to produce cigarettes. Like that's not a freedom issue.
Sort of a decriminalization of marijuana.
Like you don't have a right to have a company that makes something that kills people. Like that's different than your right to actually engage in it, right? Like I don't think it should be illegal to use drugs, but I think it should be illegal to produce things like methamphetamine. Yeah. That doesn't mean I want the user in jail.
Yeah, we legalized marijuana. Canada legalized marijuana about a year and a half ago now, and different provinces. We're very much a non-centralized federation, so different provinces have different approaches to this, and some provinces have allowed individuals to own their own plants if they want to. I think in Ontario they allow up to 4, but Quebec and Manitoba have 0 plants allowed. It's completely taken over by the state, right? There's a state-run corporation now that you can still, if you're caught selling or distributing marijuana, you can still go to prison for 14 years in Canada if you're not doing it through the. Yeah, I know, exactly. It's like, I mean,
it's like CJ. This thing you were talking about and I actually heard this from Dr. Drew. He was talking about how the $900 you're allowed to steal without getting prosecuted here in California, and it's because of this. The jails are full of people who smoke marijuana, and they can't deal with actual criminals.
No,
I guess so. But then why, when they release those marijuana smokers, why are they stealing things? Yeah, so I don't know.
Sorry, what did you guys say?
I would say letting all the people who smoke pot out of jail would be entirely fine with me.
Yeah. Because you could put actual criminals in there.
But they seem to be letting out people who run into your cafe and steal your laptop out of you. Is that a pothead?
Well, those are the ones that are not getting to jail, right? Because of the marijuana users crowding it out.
Right.
No, but aren't they at the bottom of the list? Aren't they releasing marijuana? Like why are they releasing the ones who are stealing cars and ripping catalytic converters off cars?
But the point is, there's no more room in the jail, so they can't let anybody in. I mean,
people like fucking Kamala Harris who put everyone away for pot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be a very serious problem. I was telling Fanny about this yesterday. I was telling Fanny, CJ, about that thing when you saw that guy in San Francisco screaming at those two cops,
Yeah.
you know, and everything. I was telling.
Did I ever tell you about this?
Tell Andrew about it.
I don't think I did. I was coming out of the drive-through in the tender in Western Addition, right where I used to live on Golden Gate and Fillmore.
Stanton Street?
No, Golden Gate. No, it was Golden Gate. I used to live in this building where we were the only white people in the building, like the apartment. And it was $175 a month per room.
Yeah, wow.
Because
them days are gone. Yeah.
And I was coming out of the McDonald's, which I had actually never gone in the whole time I lived there, but now I drive around the city a lot more, and I went through.
I remember that McDonald's.
Yeah.
That McDonald's. It's right.
Well, the Haight Street one.
Park, right?
No,
Yeah.
it's a Golden Gate in Fillmore. It's on Golden Gate. No, it's on Golden Gate at Fillmore. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know that one. That's right by Japantown, kind of.
There's a police station across the street. Like it's literally across the street. There's a police station.
Yeah, no, I know. I went to this one every day, or I didn't go there, but I used to commute right there.
Yeah, and I was coming out, and there was a tallish black guy, and he was yelling and screaming obscenities, and I couldn't figure out. He was kind of yelling them towards the McDonald's, and as I came out, I realized that he was yelling at two cops who were standing in the doorway of the McDonald's. I think the McDonald's called him because he was
the guy was
disrupting in McDonald's, and he was yelling racial epithets at them, like screaming.
They're white. What? Because they're white. The cops were white.
Well, one of them I think was Asian. I didn't really get a good look because I was kind of driving. And I didn't want to be staring out the window of the car.
Yeah.
But I started to get my phone out so I could record it because it was really like YouTube worthy. You know, it really was.
Yeah.
And then I had a weird panicked, scared moment where I was like, because they weren't doing anything at all. They weren't even saying "be quiet, sir" or anything like that. Like nothing. They were just standing there with their. They put their thumbs in their shirt. So they kind of stand there with their thumbs in their shirt.
Yeah.
And it went on and on and on, and it felt very strange. I started to get my camera out, and I was like, wait a minute, if he comes over here and starts screaming, I'm white. Well, they may not stop him. Like they may.
Yeah.
So this guy's a racist. This black guy.
It was shocking.
Right?
It was shocking what he was yelling at them. Like it was shocking. He was calling them KKK and I can't remember. So.
To be fair, that's not exactly a racist accusation. It's sort of an odd, it's an unfounded allegation. But I accusing them of being racist.
It was kind of complicated.
Anyway.
But yeah. No, he was. Yeah, it is true. Maybe it wasn't racist. It was just really
racially motivated somehow.
It was racially motivated.
Race, race is a factor.
Anyway, that's what happened, and I came away really kind of rattled, thinking, man, these cops are so scared they won't even arrest a guy who's verbally abusing.
That's what Fanny said. Yeah. That's it. When I told Fanny, that's what she said. She said cops in the United States, every time I read about that, they're afraid if it's a black guy. They're afraid of getting accused of racism, right? If they do anything, they'll get accused later. They're terrified of it, right? And it's not good, right? It's not a useful. But anyway, I mean, I don't know. I don't know about the crime. Is it going to continue or? There's.
All right. I'm gonna have to run out in a few minutes.
We didn't even get to the minimum wage. That's funny.
Yeah. Well, that's good. It's a good warm up for it.
Well, yeah, the other, yeah. I think we all kind of know where we stand. We probably don't even have to talk about the minimum wage, and probably all know each other's opinions by now.
Actually, I have a pretty nuanced opinion, I hope, on it.
Yeah, all right.
I'm not.
It's probably good to spend an hour on it because it, there's a lot there, right? It's a deep.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of reading on it, and
that's good. Yeah, me too.
I'll telegraph.
I take some business class. Some of my classes are business classes, and I do a lot of stuff on the minimum wage. And one of the things I realized the other day, I thought, if I can go through the whole session working on this, and I can just get to the end, and I can get through, if they can no longer have the idea that the government can just order prosperity, then I will have done something good. Because most people have this idea that the government can basically pass laws to make us prosperous, right? That's the way that the causality doesn't
I would
go
actually,
that way, right?
I'd probably agree with that. So my view of it is a little different, but
Yeah. Okay.
it's more along
Well,
the lines of
interesting.
I don't think it's a bad thing under all circumstances, which I think you were saying, CJ, is you're more of like the pretty hard line about it. I
I'm in favor of abolition of minimum wages, but one thing I would say, if they're low enough, they may serve some kind of a useful purpose of standardizing what a Joe job is paid, right? So that people know that if they go into Tim Horton or McDonald's or whatever, that the wage is going to be $12.50 an hour, right? You know, it's kind of like they just, you know, as long as like it's kind of like it creates. I mean, that could happen in a free market anyway, right? That something like that likely would happen in a free market. A general low skilled job would come out, you know, being more or less a standard wage anyway, you know. But
well, there's a whole interplay between the elasticity and the tightness of the labor market and
that's true.
monopolies and
That's
all
true.
this different stuff.
Yeah,
So
depending how
my
quickly things are
opinion that
growing. Yeah, yeah,
I'll basically try and make the argument that there's an economic condition under which it is okay, and also that if you set it low enough and then index it to inflation, it'll probably do more harm or more good than harm if it's
yeah.
set
I wonder.
significantly
Well,
enough.
one of the things seems to be if it's above about 50% of median income, it really starts to have negative
Well, and
effects,
I don't like this idea of
right?
$15 or
Yeah,
25 nationally. I think that's insane.
yeah.
But
I mean, if you look at in France, for example, they have much higher minimum wages than in the United States. A good example. They also have stronger labor protections. Many European countries do. Not Germany, interestingly, but France, and not the UK. But they have a serious. It tends to affect young people and particularly minorities and so on much more because especially young people because
yeah,
right, young people are a higher risk, right? I mean, how can you prove that 18-year-old is not, you know, the 28-year-old you can call his former employers, right? You figure out if
that's
he's
actually
going to
one of the
steal from
things
you or not, right?
that was the most surprising thing I heard Sanders say that I disagreed with, which is he wanted a $15 minimum wage, but he didn't think that teenagers should be exempt, which I totally think they should be. Like you're
Again, yeah, but why make exemptions? Like, why not just allow the market to, you know, like I don't understand because I had a student once who was giving a presentation
No,
and she said, you know, well, we could make this
is
exemption
kind of
and
a
this
good
and that and
one
the other.
because the minimum
Yeah.
wage you've said, Jason, the minimum wage is like this kind of big prosperity boon for for wealthy or middle class teenagers.
Well, eventually they don't get the jobs anymore, right? I mean,
right.
if you look at if it typically what it will do is it will drive companies to try and find ways to save on labor costs. So one of the ways they can do that, especially for big companies, is to automate, right? They will, and that means that you'll favor if you're not talking about expensive, really high-end restaurants, you're not going to favor little small restaurants that need a few employees. They're going to get squeezed out by McDonald's and fast food networks that can have the capital investment to, you know. I mean, that's one of the effects. And so those jobs that you're talking about, CJ, there's usually an interim period where the teenagers like remember Rob's son was making like $12 an hour. He was making this huge amount of money to work at the place up there in Saint Agathe. You remember that? Right? He had all this money he didn't know what to do with. You know, like there'll be a period where they'll make that money, right? But how long can that go on, right? Before the firm can't compete anymore or a
Yeah,
downturn
no,
of
the
some
big
kind.
big
You know,
corporations are an interesting aspect of that.
well,
Uh,
big corporations are better positioned to adapt to forced increases in minimum wages
oh,
than
for
small
sure.
entities,
Which
right?
is also
And so
why they're
you
voluntarily
effectively you're
imposing one
favoring, yeah.
preemptively.
Well, you're favoring large corporations over small business. This is just right. I mean, if you know, if McDonald's can in fact
That's
spend
true, all things being
millions, you
equal.
know, yeah.
Right.
No, but
Anyway,
next time
I'll
we talk about it, I'll bring in some. I have some personal information through some friends of mine who own businesses just to talk because it's that I could show you that might
cool.
anyway. But because we sound like we started the conversation, but not need
Yeah.
more
Yeah, we'll get
time.
back. We'll get
Yeah,
back. Check, see how this recording works. And that's good.
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Don't get this one stolen, CJ. Yeah,
Yeah.
watch your car more carefully next time. Right. I'm just kidding. That's a nasty
All right.
joke. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay, guys.
All right.
All right,
Yeah.
take it
See
easy.
ya.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.